All right, we are back, and we're on a little bit of a streak, getting some serious guests in on the podcast. We are thrilled to welcome senior fantasy analyst at Pro Football Focus, Scott Barrett, who the Wolf has been raving about like for weeks, really more than weeks, but only in the last couple weeks he's started thinking it was a possibility to get him on the show. He's on the show right now. Scott, thanks for joining us. How you doing?
I'm awesome, man. Thanks for having me on here to talk rookies. I'm really excited.
Oh, man. I know
Absolutely.
before we went on the air, I asked you, and this is where we're going to get into things. We're just going to kick things off right away. I was like, man, I can't wait to see if you're as crazy about Saquon Barkley as the Wolf is, and you said you probably are. I mean, we'll see. I mean, I'll just go right into the interview right now. Saquon Barkley, deservedly considered the clear-cut number one rookie for fantasy football this season. How high does he belong? Is the Wolf insane for placing him in his top 5 overall?
So he's the obvious 101. And then not only is he the 101, but this is like a pretty poor draft class, I think. But I think he's worth like the 103, 104, 105, and like 203, just off the top of my head. He's a top 10 dynasty pick for sure. I had him as my number 7 overall player in PPR leagues. That was before the Mark Ingram news. So I don't remember if I had him below or above Alvin Kamara. I had that on my laptop, not my desktop, which I'm working on now. But so I could definitely see him as high as number 7. Number 5 is probably not too far from there. There's a lot to like. I think the question marks, let's start with those because there are some. Sam Monson had a really good article over at my site, Pro Football Focus, talking about some of his concerns, primarily being that he's kind of looking for a home run on every single play that's going to cause him to get tackled for a loss of yardage quite frequently. The statistics back that up as well. He led all combine invite running backs and missed tackles forced per touch, career receiving yards. But he was also he did lead the class in percentage of carries to go for negative yards or 0 and negative yards, which is a concern. But at the same time, disastrous offensive line. Yeah. He was contacted before the line of scrimmage in 30% of his runs that led the group, or at the line of scrimmage, also leading the group. I think part of that is his run style, but at the same time, he was the defensive focal point of all these teams he was playing against, and that's super rare for a running back. So you got to spot him that. You got to spot him the offensive line. And plus, yeah, he's going for these home runs, but he's also hitting home runs at the highest rate, an unprecedented rate. From what I saw on tape, I saw easily the best running back in this class. You like that he's also easily the best receiving running back in this class. He's a good blocker. Sean Payton called him the best running back prospect in 25 years. Guy just drafted Alvin Kamara last year. Dave Gettleman said highest prospect he's ever graded, except for Peyton Manning. They were on an even playing field. Said multiple times, guy is touched by the hand of God. I buy that. So we know he's awesome. The concerns then are, Giants offense sucked last year. They didn't have Odell Beckham. They had a bottom 5 head coach, offensive mind probably. But they got Pat Shurmur, one of my boys. And not only is he one of my boys, but he is like the guy to go to if you want a workhorse running back. I came up with a stat like actual opportunity, if you're familiar with that, but it's just a more simpler version, weighted opportunity, just assigns the appropriate valuation of carries and targets in PPR. So like targets are worth like 3.3 times as much as the average carry. So just looking at that, he was the most ideal offensive play caller for a fantasy running back. You look at Steven Jackson, Trent Richardson, LaShawn McCoy, all those guys combined to average 310 carries, 63 targets per season with Shurmur. Only Le'Veon Bell's coming close to that. That's above, Todd Gurley's numbers last year. So just ideal landing spot, I think. Yeah, offensive line, the right side of that offensive line isn't good. The offense wasn't good last year. I'm sure it takes a step forward, but, Shurmur said time and time again in his interviews, the number one thing he looks for in a running back is can they catch the ball, because that's so important to him in the offense, and Saquon clearly can. So I think the target volume there, easily a top 10 running back. Like I said, I had him top 7 or top 8 overall. Nick, I want to hear your case. I realize I just talked a lot there.
No. That's what we want. I want to know. I want you to defend yourself, and I want to know, Scott, before we go to the next question, I want to know, who do you have above him? I mean, because you have 6 guys above him. I want to know who you have above him that the Wolf doesn't.
I mean, I think all the points Scott brought up too, and I want to hear those too in a second, are very fair. The talent generational is often overthrown, but it seems to me that Saquon Barkley fits that from all the scouting reports I've read, from all the film I've watched. Bigger Barry Sanders doesn't seem like it's unfair to call him. And then, like you mentioned, Pat Shurmur, the bell cow breeder. I wrote an article about him and his history. You outlined all the stats that I already used in that article.
Right.
So thanks for making my job easy on the interview here. I mean, it's a perfect fit for a versatile talent like that. Ideal fit of volume, ideal fit of talent, and then the surrounding talent is good enough when you got, Odell Beckham, obviously very explosive on the outside, one of the best receivers in the game, plus Sterling Shepard, Evan Ingram. So great weapons in the sense that you can't, what you did at Penn State, make him just the focal point of your defense in Saquon Barkley, but not so explosive with Eli Manning as your aging quarterback that it's going to be an aerial show. They've already said they wanted to become a more physical, run-heavy team. So it's kind of the perfect blend of enough talent to move the ball, get him into the red zone, but not to siphon more than, he'll still get his 25, 30 touches a game in this Shurmur-based offense. So the only real risk is, like you mentioned, is he going to be trying to break that home run every time and then not translate on an NFL field? I don't see it as a huge risk, though. I think he's an absolute monster. The scheme, everything's just a perfect fit when we grade him in our fantasy stock formula. So in that case, I'm putting him above guys like David Johnson and Alvin Kamara, which I know is insane, and that's probably some of the guys you have above him.
Who are your 4 guys above him, Wolf? Who are your 4 guys above him? Who are your 4 guys
who do you
above
have above him?
No, who do you have? Who are your 4?
Who am I for?
Yeah.
Antonio Brown, Zeke Elliott, Le'Veon Bell, Todd Gurley. Those are like the 4 non-negotiables. And then I have like a talent tier 2, where he's the top of it, Saquon Barkley, alongside Alvin Kamara, David Johnson, and DeAndre Hopkins. That's a tier to me as well. And then from there, it becomes a lot less clear. But what about you, Scott? Who do you have above him?
So I just want to remind the listeners at home, with running backs in particular, it's the most volume-based position in fantasy football. I've done the studies, my bell cow report every year. Snaps has the highest correlation to fantasy points at the position, below only rushing yards and rushing touchdowns. It's above targets, well above carries. You just want guys on the field seeing targets, seeing carries, and Saquon's going to get that. Who do I have above him? Le'Veon Bell, just the larger sample of dominance. I put him over Todd Gurley, but Todd Gurley's 2017 season.
And Mike Wright and me like Bell more than Gurley,
okay.
But not this guy. Not this
Todd
guy.
Gurley all day, baby.
Hey, so I think you just need to look at that larger sample of dominance, and you just know exactly what you're going to get. But the case for Todd Gurley is a strong one. So if you just look at fantasy season weeks 1 through 16, his 2017 fantasy season ranks top 15 all time at any position, including quarterbacks. In PPR, that's unreal. And I have no reason to doubt the Rams, and their defense got better, arguably more running work for Gurley. Yeah. But yeah, so after him, I actually have David Johnson in my top 3. I was concerned about him with the coaching regime change, but everything I've read is just, hey, we know this guy is basically the entirety of our offense, and we're going to feed him as such. Remember, we're talking PPR here. At least I hope we are. And he's going to see a ton of target volume. He might be the best receiving running back in the league. After him, I have Antonio Brown. Just speaking of samples of dominance, just no one's coming close to what he's done over the past 4 or 5 years. Like maybe Jerry Jones, Marvin Harrison, and like one other guy ever have been near what he's been putting up. And then you have
Jerry Rice, I imagine, not Jerry Jones.
Yeah, not Jerry Jones.
I'm just picturing Jerry Jones.
Jerry Jones always struggled to create separation.
If you ever watch Trailer Park Boys, like one of the main characters just messes up. I do that on every single podcast. So just if you're playing a drinking game at home, just drink next time.
Everybody take a shot.
Love it.
Yeah, I call Larry Fitzgerald like Jeffrey Fitzgerald or something. It's gonna happen. I don't know what that is. After Antonio Brown, I have Zeke. Maybe a little bit of a concern that Tavon Austin assumes that scat back role, or he's not going to see the uptick in targets we're looking for. But he's my number 5, and I feel pretty good about that. Behind him, I have DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, this guy's just been a nuts fantasy superstar with the worst talent ever. Yeah. And now he finally gets a great quarterback, in my opinion. And then after him, I had it Saquon, then kind of Kamara and Hunt in their own tier. I think I'm ready to leapfrog Saquon with Kamara. I'm not set on that. I'm actually off from work this week, so I'm not ready to dive too deep into the numbers. But I feel pretty good about that. And then it's going to be a tough call. I think Hunt's going to get a lot more receiving work. That's what Andy Reid's been saying, and he deserves it so long as he steps up as a pass blocker. But I think that's my boy, and he's been my boy since Toledo. So yeah, but I feel really good about that 9. Just the last 3, I could probably move some guys around.
Excellent. Well, so Saquon, again, we both agree is clearly at the top of this very deep running back class. Some gurus are even deeming it deeper than last year's absurd crew. So up to 8 backs, I think, have legitimate claims to go number 2 after Saquon. Who do you think it should be?
I think that's Rashad Penny. Like I said, I look for bell cow running backs. I want every down potential. If you're a 2-down running back, that doesn't really offer me a lot in PPR. If you're just a scat back, that doesn't offer me a lot. And they're fairly easily replaceable. You could get like the LeGarrette Blunts of the world, Isaiah Crowells, whatever. They're just super cheap. And then Theo Riddick, how cheap is he? And he, he kind of puts up solid numbers. As like you don't want these guys as starters in your starting lineup. You want them as bye-week fill-ins pretty much. But Rashad Penny, I thought he had 3-down potential. My main concern was that he oddly didn't run a lot of routes. He didn't see a lot of targets, but he was hyper efficient when he was. He led the combine invite class in yards per route run, minimum 50 career targets. One of the worst pass blockers in college over the past few years by PFF's metrics pretty easily. There was a willingness on tape. He has the body size, but that was the main concern for me. Also, it came from weaker competition that he faced off against, but his numbers on the ground dominated the class far more so than Saquon Barkley. Again, even against tougher competition like Power 5 opponents, he was dominant. And then what really sold me was just the post-draft press conference, which I went back and watched. And he just said over and over, John Schneider, Pete Carroll, this is a 3-down running back. Yep. He's going to be your every down running back. He's going to be your bell cow, et cetera. We like him in the passing game. We think he's going to be a good enough blocker. We'll work on that with him. He's willing, et cetera. I get offensive line concerns. I get they weren't really a run-heavy team last year, and I don't blame them for not. It really, with him, it really comes down to whether or not he's going to see that 3rd down, passing down work, and he might not. This might just be typical Pete Carroll optimism, but even with that factored in, he's still clearly the 102 for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm in full agreement there. I have him as my number 2. Mike Wright actually agreed with us, so that makes us 3 for 3 here. We set the over-under at 300 on his touches, and both of us took the over just because we do think he's going to be that pure bell cow. I mean, the words, obviously, Pete Carroll, notorious for blowing his players and blowing smoke up their ass all the time, but ultimately, when you go and say we would have taken him at 18 and we, got the chance to trade down and still get our guy, but if you're willing to take him at 18 and everybody else is labeling it as such a reach, I don't care as a fantasy owner whether it was a real life reach or not. I think the team clearly loves him. They have nobody else there, as you mentioned, just a complete value hole of a situation. They're going to feed him. Russell Wilson-led offense will be top 15 in the league. The line is a concern, as you mentioned, but they added DJ Fluker, who at minimum can move the pile, is a decent run blocker. So they can only go forward, I think, as an offensive line as Dwayne Brown gels a little bit more. So, yeah, that's a concern, but ultimately the volume's the king, like you said, at running back. I think the talent is definitely there, and if he does have that receiving game role they keep hitting at, he's going to be an absolute steal where he's going right now towards the end of round 3, 4. I love Penny. Clearly my number 2 as well.
All right, let's talk the other side of that spectrum completely. And a big surprise, by the way, Wolf, you taking the over on something. Just, Scott, you don't know us that well. The Wolf is a compulsive over-taker in bets.
Always.
I've won many bets off the Wolf in the last couple of years where he had a ridiculous over. 50 touchdowns for Tom Brady, something. Anyway, so if there's any bet, if you need money in a pinch, text this guy and make a ridiculous bet where he needs to take the over. Rookie running backs. Which rookie running back are you most likely to avoid? And I mean, I guess we're talking about of those top 8, maybe not just any guy, but which rookie running back are you most likely to avoid and why?
I'm a big hater on this class, man. I got to be honest. A lot of people have Derrius Guice as their 102 or 103, and I think that's ridiculous. I think he's going to step in right away, take that early down role, but also see very few targets to almost none targets, zero third down work. That's all Chris Thompson. That's basically what Jay Gruden had said. Best case scenario, looking for an Alf Morris kind of level of production, but you have to remember that was he did that with Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay, two guys who have historically gotten the most from the running back position when they've coached. And we've seen in recent years, Samaje Perine, Rob Kelly, I think these are two pretty bad running backs, especially in comparison to Derrius Guice. But they had just 4 RB1 weeks over the past 2 seasons. That's including multiple weeks with Chris Thompson out of the lineup. I like him as a talent, as a player, as a running back. I just don't think the role is super valuable, especially not to warrant the 103. I'm low on Kerryon Johnson. I'm a draft capital whore, but in this case, I'm not buying into it. Everything I heard from the coach, from the GM is, listen, we want to be a running back by committee team. This is a running back by committee league. We're going to have 3 guys active every week, and each 3 serving a specific role. And from what they said, hey, listen, Kerryon Johnson ran between the guards a lot, but I think we're going to use him more on the outside. Who's going to work between the guards? It's probably going to be LeGarrette Blount, and he's probably also going to get the goal line work, the near end zone work. Then you have Theo Riddick stealing the target. So where's the value in that? And he might also be competing against Amir Abdullah, who they still for some reason talked up following the draft. That's 4 running backs that, make things super messy. Royce Freeman I like a lot, but I got the vibe that Denver didn't like him as a pass catcher. That doesn't make sense to me. I don't think that Devontae Booker is really good in that role, but it seems like they like him there. And Ronald Jones, after they drafted him, I love him, but only as a pure runner. He's not going to see targets at all. But after the draft, Jason Litch was just Peyton Barber. This is a running back by committee situation. Nick Chubb, he said the same thing. Yeah, he's going to compete, but Carlos Hyde's here, and we like Carlos Hyde. And of course, Duke Johnson has a cemented role that Nick Chubb's not going to touch. And then Sony Michel, he's my 103. A lot of potential there given draft capital, but we know how Belichick has always used that position, including Lawrence Maroney, the last running back he took in the first round. So just no one really to get too excited about it outside of those top 2, I think.
Wolf?
Yeah, I think all the guys, that's why I consider Barkley and a tier on his own. Then I had Penny right there at the number 2, because there are tons of question marks. Guice is my 3. I know you just talked about how you don't love him. I think just in terms of volume, obviously Samaje Perine and Rob Kelly didn't do jack shit, but they're just awful running backs. I think Guice is just a much more talented guy. So even if he's only seeing those first early down carries, I think that almost is better for him in a way, because you see these big backs often twisting their body in weird ways in the receiving game. This is just more anecdotal. I have nothing to back it up, but those are when I often see these guys getting hurt, is when they're being used in a role that's not for them. And I think he's going to be fit perfectly for 18, 20 carries or so in a pretty solid offense, clock control offense. Alex Smith is great at moving the chains, so he's going to get a decent amount of volume. He's going to be on the field a good amount and score a good amount of touchdowns. So he's kind of my clear 3rd. And then I agree, there's just tons of question marks here on out. I think Kerryon Johnson, the case you made there, is exactly why I hate him. Coming from a Patriot system, Matt Patricia loves committees. They've already talked about how they want a committee, so he's by far the guy I'm avoiding the most, is Kerryon Johnson, followed quickly by Nick Chubb. I think Carlos Hyde is an underrated talent and is not going to just fade away into the middle of the night. So I think those are the 2 that are clearly at the bottom. I have them kind of in my tier 4. And then the rest is just a big lump of question mark, with Sony Michel probably having the highest upside of that group, even maybe more than Rashad Penny, if he can emerge in that Dion Lewis 18 to 20 type of touches with 15 carries, 3 catches a week, which he's built for. He could definitely do. I absolutely love Sony Michel if we can peg him for that, but obviously we can't just peg him for that right away, at least with the Patriots and the fumbling concerns too. So lots of risk. But I would say the lowest I am on is Kerryon Johnson and Nick Chubb for sure.
Hey, Scott, outside of running backs, give me 2 rookies you feel could have big fantasy impacts in year 1. And as an offshoot of that, would you have taken Baker Mayfield with the number 1 pick if you were the Browns?
Oh, absolutely.
Oh,
Yes.
come on.
I'm a huge Mayfield truther. I love it.
Mike Wright told me you were going to say that, but
So you're a doubter, Nat, right?
I'm a doubter.
Okay. Here's what I need you to do.
All right.
Don't plug anything else for me the rest of the show, but just read my most recent article on Baker Mayfield, and I buried a bunch of charts and links in there. Make sure you click on every single one of those charts. I wrote it from the perspective of trying to persuade the world's biggest Baker Mayfield doubter, and I think I did a good job of that. So make sure
I'm not the biggest. I will check it out.
check.
I will definitely check it out. I'm not the biggest doubter. I would have taken him. He would have been the third quarterback I took. I like him more than Josh Allen.
I'm with you, Scott. I love him.
You're with him, and I mean honestly, like there's plenty of people that agree with me, but we've had two serious fantasy guys on recently that both agreed with you, and obviously, you know, the incredibly well-respected Cleveland Browns front office agreed with you. So, I mean, that pretty much ends the conversation. I will read the article, and I will get back to you, and I'll let you know if I have been swayed. Who are the two rookies other than guys in the running back class that you think could have big fantasy impacts in year one?
So I don't think Lamar Jackson plays a game this year, but if he does, I'd have him as like a QB1 in those games he's going to play. I really think his rushing upside is immense. I wrote about that elsewhere. Mike Gesicki, maybe, but you know, tight ends really tend not to produce in year one, so I'm not seeing that. So I think it would have to come from the wide receivers. Really, I do like DJ Moore. I do like Calvin Ridley. I do like James Washington a little bit. I think he's going to slide right into that Martavis Bryant role. He had 84 targets last year. And, you know, we've seen Pittsburgh get a lot of success from rookie wide receivers, Juju Smith-Schuster last year, Martavis Bryant in 2014. But I guess the guy who's really not on a lot of people's radar, is Michael Gallup, who's with the Cowboys. And if he is on the radar, it's just they're looking at, well, Des Bryant's gone, Jason Witten's gone, Bryce Butler's gone. That's 242 targets unaccounted for. And they only have Allen Hurns, Rico Gathers, Cole Beasley, Deontay Thompson, Terrence Williams. Gross. Yeah, I agree. So like, there's definitely room for targets there. But what people don't realize is Michael Gallup was awesome in college. PFF loved him. We had him as one of our top 5 wide receivers in this class. And my favorite metric for wide receivers, I've read about this a lot. It's like the best metric. It's just the most predictive or whatever. And that's yards per route run. So looking in college, there's been 391 wide receivers to run at least 600 routes since 2014. Gallup ranks 3rd in career yards per route run. That's just one spot ahead of Corey Davis. He also ranks 2nd best in yards per route. His 2016 season ranks 2nd best in yards per route run out of 1,274 qualifying wide receiver seasons since 2014. And all those seasons that are in the top 10 come from guys who are playing in the NFL, and most of which are having some success. So they're like a Taywan Taylor, who I project to have some success in the immediate future. But yeah, I just like him a lot. It's a combination of role as well as I think talent.
Wolf, who you like?
So I agree in terms of wide receivers. Gallup's actually my favorite, highest ranked one in terms of, we call it, again, the value holes, in terms of situations where there's tons of openings. You outlined how many targets are available there with all those guys departing. I think he could potentially step up and, as a rookie, still fill that role right away. So I love Gallup. And you mentioned Gesicki, and I know rookie tight ends, the trend is they just do nothing every single time. But Adam Gase has been pretty historic. I know last year he had like a banged up Julius Thomas, didn't do jack shit. But ultimately over his career, we've seen Gase, especially in the red zone, really utilize his tight ends well. I think Gesicki is just an absolute athletic freak and could potentially buck this trend of rookie tight ends not doing anything, especially when you consider who's around him. You got a Danny Amendola who always gets hurt and really doesn't do anything in the playoffs anyways. It's Albert Wilson. I mean, some metrics suggest he's great, but who knows exactly how he'll do in a flourish role. Just a bunch of names who you don't really know. So there's certainly opportunity there in Miami. So Gesicki and Gallup would be the two names I'd single out as well. In terms of a follow-up, who do you think is the most under-the-radar rookie pick that could end up being 2018's Alvin Kamara? I know that's probably not going to be reachable, but who's that sleeper that could really just explode that nobody was expecting to?
I honestly probably don't have one, but I'd be looking at Indianapolis's running back tandem, Nyheim Hines, Jordan Wilkins, who they drafted. I like both of those guys really quite a bit, and they kind of serve different roles. Hines looks like he could even play slot wide receiver for him, or for the scat back role, he's a converted wide receiver. His rushing metrics weren't too bad. Maybe he, becomes the bell cow. I'm not a Marlon Mack fan. I know he was playing hurt last year, but he's coming into this season hurt as well, and he didn't really impress. I wouldn't be shocked if one of these guys might leapfrog him, and then Wilkins crushed by a number of different metrics, and I have no idea why he fell as far as he did in the draft. He's just a great runner with good vision, elite metrics. One of those guys, definitely could surprise me. If Andrew Luck's healthy, that's a very valuable role. If not, it's not. But there's some upside there.
Yeah, Frank Wright could totally – he's used scat backs really well in the past between Danny Woodhead, Darren Sproles. So I love the Indy situation. That's actually exactly what Mike Wright zoomed in on too. Definitely some value there. Again, Marlon Mack, I'm not a believer in him either. I think it's definitely an enormous opportunity for whoever. It could even be Robert Turbin. You never know. But somebody will emerge with some value if Luck is healthy. And I think Hines is a really good bet to be that guy. I'm a huge fan of him too.
All right, let's talk veterans real quick. You got time for veterans, Wolf, or do you want to go right into no huddles?
I like veterans, yeah. Good? We can maybe get 2 to 3 veterans for each one, yeah.
All right, definitely. Let's talk the veteran lens. Whether a quarterback gained new weaponry or a running back or wide receiver avoided further competition being added amongst the rookies, tons of veterans gained enormous value following the draft. Regardless of any position, who do you consider the 2 biggest veteran risers following the draft?
I'm not as good off the cuff. Why don't you let Wolf handle that, and I'll come up with something.
Wolf, give me your prepackaged answer that I'm totally
well, absolutely.
Familiar with.
Last time we talked about McCaffrey being a huge winner for the Panthers, but then they just go and sign C.J. Anderson. That's what me and Mike were raving about, was McCaffrey just has all this bell cow potential volume. We shouted out you, in fact, Scott, because I know you were raving about Christian McCaffrey post-draft too, and I still think he could have some serious value, but C.J. Anderson should slide in that Jay Stu role, and probably is even more efficient at this point than Jay Stu ever was. So I don't love McCaffrey nearly as much as I once did. Juju Smith-Schuster at the wide receiver position has to be one of my favorite winners of this draft. In the games when Martavis Bryant was out, but he and AB played together, Juju, he averaged 32% of the target share versus 13% of the target share when all 3 of them were active. So obviously it's not going to just automatically translate into 2018, but you got to imagine the guy takes a healthy leap forward in target share. And I know there's just enormous PFF stats about how Juju graded out in terms of the wide. I think he was one of the top receivers, if not the top receiver, in terms of quarterback passer rating on certain amount of you probably know the stat better than I do. I know we've cited it in some articles. But Juju, to me, huge winner. I think the volume's definitely going up. And from there, I'm trying to remember if I did Jay Ajayi last time. I might have mentioned him, but I think he's actually a decent winner. I know he's kind of pigeonholed into this committee situation. Corey Clement, Darren Sproles will be involved, but early down work in one of the most explosive offenses in the league is still very valuable, especially when it's going to come at the stripe with Blunt removed, no rookie competition added. I think the Eagles averaged the most points in the league per game last year, and I think Ajayi eats into that scoring pie a lot more now with a less cloudy role for sure.
Wolf, how many times are you going to get jerked around by Jay Ajayi? Like, seriously. I mean, he's the rare example. He's the rare example. I'm not saying I've never been fooled by the guy, but he's the rare example of somebody that managed to completely fool you 2 times in the same year. Like, you were so high on him before the draft, then he went to the Eagles and you were like, Okay. I know he's been terrible, but this is it. This is like, and then he dicked you again.
That offensive line, I'll bet it's maybe not even so much of a bet on Ajayi as it is that offensive line.
Okay.
There's unbelievable. They run so many unique trap and counters and all these unique runs that Ajayi can thrive with. When he's got blockers out in space, his open field vision's great. I think his usage goes up this year. I know he jerked me around last year.
You might be right.
A different situation.
You might be right, but if you're wrong, you're not ever allowed to like tout
I'll
him
never
on the
draft him
podcast
again. I'll
Seriously.
go personally.
Never.
I'll go punch him right in the square in the nose. I'll spit a loogie right on his face. Let him kick my ass after. But it's very cathartic to pull that off.
Mr. Ajayi, he didn't mean that, but you're not allowed to be high on him anymore.
That's
All right,
fair.
With that said, Scott, do you have any thoughts on that question now?
Yeah, I'd just say Alex Collins. I figured Baltimore would draft a running back, but he didn't. And then Ricky Seals-Jones. I mean, there's massive opportunity there. I don't like Kirk. He ran 95% routes from the slot in college, and now he's supposed to move outside. But we saw how well that worked with Nelson Aguilar and that it was disastrous. And who are the other wide receivers there? There's no one really. But he did draft an effective quarterback in case something happens to Sam Bradford. And, he was great on a very limited sample last year. The offensive coordinator is saying that he's designing a bunch of plays for him in his playbook. They look to feature him. So I think his draft stock has skyrocketed, and he's really a guy I'm targeting in drafts because you look at the top 12 tight ends, it's Gronk to Eifert, let's say, and then you look at the next 9, and none of those are even remotely interesting to me. And then you get to Ricky Seals-Jones, so I like him a lot as a sleeper. Some people are messing around with Jared Cook. I'll never take Jared Cook. I like RSJ's upside way more. Maybe even Ben Watson if you want to go dumpster diving. But yeah, so I like him a lot. And Collins, he played fantastic last year. But you see a lot with guys who just only had one good season, not a lot of draft capital behind them, changing teams, whatever the case. They're quick to replace them. But it was encouraging Baltimore did not.
All right, so same exact question, but this time I'm looking for biggest veteran losers. Do you want me to start with the Wolf again, or do you feel more comfortable, on the negative side of the coin?
And let's do one each because I know your time is short, Scott. My computer battery life is also short right now too.
Oh wow!
So I do want to get to the 2-minute offense, but if we can just
give me one veteran loser.
Quick loser each. I like.
Wolf, you got one veteran loser in your holster? I know you do.
Last time we talked about Burkhead, so I won't use him again, but it's got to be Chris Carson. We just talked about how Rashad Penny's going to take over that role. He goes from a guy who was kind of intrigued by in the middle rounds to just completely worthless. I tossed him out as nothing more than a handcuff at best.
Scott, you got a veteran loser for me?
Yeah, I would have echoed Burkhead, but just for the sake of the brand, I'll apologize for all Carlos Henderson dynasty owners. I kind of led the train on that. Just his stats were obscene in college. I was like, listen, either this guy is Golden Tate or he's Tavon Austin, and I don't know which. Then, he had the broken hand or whatever it was. He got into trouble off the field. And then Denver, it seems, was quick to replace him with Cortland Sutton to immediately play as the wide receiver 3. That's their expectations for him. And you think he has massive upside going forward as well. And I think that really hurts Carlos Henderson, and I wouldn't be shocked if he's cut at some point this season.
All right, that brings us to the no-huddle offense. I'm going to hit you with 6 rapid-fire questions. Wolf, no rambling.
I won't ramble.
These are
in fact, let's just let Scott run it through. I already did this with Mike Wright last time, so my answers are already out there. So we'll just why don't we alternate questions and just have Scott just run through this.
Okay, and we already know the answer to the first one because this guy clearly knows what he's talking about. Who should go number 1 overall in your fantasy draft?
Le'Veon Bell.
Thank you very much. Go ahead, Wolf.
Disagree. It's Todd Gurley, but so be it. What early round draft pick, rounds 1 through 3, is going to ruin fantasy seasons this year?
I don't know, but I've been seeing Deshaun Watson go as early as that, and I think that's like 6 rounds too early, maybe.
Quarterbacks that early is disgusting.
Anybody's taking a quarterback 1 through 3.
Ew.
That's nuts. What mid-round draft pick is going to win someone some titles this year?
I'm really not good on my feet. I got to be honest with you guys.
It's all about being on the feet too.
Wolf,
I'm trying to pull up ADP.
Wolf, give me a mid-round draft pick that's going to win some titles, real quick.
Who do I think's a mid-round guy that could win some titles?
Sure.
I just talked about Juju Smith at length. I think he stays at round 5 or 6. But right now, I love Josh Gordon's ADP right now too. I think he's an absolute steal at his current price going towards the end of round 4 with the upside he brings, the talent he brings. I love Josh Gordon at the price he's going.
Scott?
I love both of those. So Juju Smith-Schuster is like ADP wide receiver 28, and last year he finished as a wide receiver 1. That kind of disparity is just ridiculous, especially with Martavis Bryant off of the team. And then Josh Gordon, I love it. So he's going in, the 4th round? He was going in the 2nd round at some point last season, and he wasn't even cleared to play football.
Right.
The guy finally has a good quarterback, in my opinion, the best quarterback to come out in quite a few seasons, assuming they play Baker Mayfield. If not, they have Tyrod Taylor, who's one of the greatest deep ball passers in the game. People don't give him credit for that, but it's true. And, that's really where he dominated multiple years ago. And remember, he put together a top 25 all-time wide receiver season in fantasy points per game, and he did that catching passes from Jason Campbell and Brandon Weeden.
Mm-hmm.
And PFF said he was awesome last year. In the games he did play, he graded out top 20, and he looked as good as ever. So why not? Yeah, massive upside with him there.
We call them penny stocks, and most call them late-round lottery tickets. Do you have one or two who you just have to have in those late final rounds?
I just answered this in a Reddit AMA, so I'll pull it up for you. But definitely one of those was Ricky Seals-Jones as a tight end. Just looking at wide receiver position, so Kenny Stills is wide receiver 66. That makes absolutely no sense to me. Terrell Pryor's good value at wide receiver 60. Deshaun Jackson, absolutely at wide receiver 57. Marquise Lee, Josh Doxson in that wide receiver 50 range. Running backs, there's really not too many LA. Quarterbacks, there's just a ton of good value there. I could pull up my case for Jameis Winston if you guys want to hear it. I think it's a really good argument. But
if we had the time, I would love to hear it, but my computer is now at 1%, so we're dwindling.
Fair enough. He's QB21. Read my injury article. He's a massive steal.
Scott, what's the single most important move fantasy owners can make in 2018 that's going to win them a title?
Following me on Twitter.
Yeah, there you go. And what's your Twitter handle?
It's at Scott Barrett DFB.
You heard it here
Absolutely.
first, folks.
And what's your boldest prediction for the last final question of 2018?
That's a tough one because last year I said Kareem Hunt was a league winner, and I said that before Spencer Ware's injury. So I have to feel really good about it this year if I have one. So I'm afraid I'm going to have to decline, and you'll have to wait for that article that's going to come out in a few months.
Awesome.
Come back on in like 6 months and give us some more of this. That was awesome.
I could do that for sure. I'd love to.
All right, man. We really appreciate you taking the time. Scott Barrett. Pro football. Sorry, guys. Wolf, is your computer still going on?
No, I think it's dead.
Oh my god! Just like as I was giving you the send off, all of a sudden like everything started like flickering, and I was like, "Oh, this is what we've been waiting for." Scott Barrett, senior fantasy analyst, Pro Football Focus. Thanks so much for taking the time. And if the Wolf were still with us, he would give you the same sentiment. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
All right, see you later, bud.